All right, Florida State Pitt get together. I'm going to ask you this very broad question, Mike, and then I want James, George, and Chris to take over. What happened to Pitt?
Wow.
They're terrible.
I did. Yeah, no, they're terrible. They're awful. They're putrid. They're embarrassing. They're laughing stock. They're any other word you want to give me. Going into the year, I thought they were a bit overrated. Like, I didn't think they were going to be as good. Certainly not 2 years ago with Pickett. I did not even think they'd necessarily be as good as last year. That, amazingly enough, guys, I don't know if you're aware, but there are a lot of Pitt fans that last year looked at it as like this unacceptable down year that you win the ACC. How could you possibly go to the Sun Bowl? Like, my God. And then it ended up being way better than obviously what we're seeing now. And they at least did get a bowl win out of it. So what's happened, they swung and missed with a transfer quarterback. When you swing and miss with a transfer quarterback, you can get screwed. They swung and missed with a transfer quarterback. I thought Phil Jurkovec threw too many interceptions. I talked to a lot of national guys entering the season. They thought he made a lot of mistakes. That was the problem, clearly. Like, that's the single reason they lost the backyard brawl when WVU had their backup QB and they couldn't move the ball. 3 picks. WVU ended up advancing the ball and scoring off of them, and they were toast. And then you saw that against Cincinnati, speaking of them the week before. So you swing and miss on a transfer QB. We can talk all day about whether or not they're using the running backs right, what's going on with Cignetti in the offense. The offense outside the Louisville game certainly has struggled this year. The line's not what it was 2 years ago. Defense hasn't been what it's been. Narduzzi is skirting decisions and saying Cignetti has to be benching players when it should be him as the head coach. It has been a complete dumpster fire. But I would say the overall theme is when you swing and miss at a veteran transfer QB that makes so many mistakes, not just plays bad, but makes so many mistakes, way more than Keaton Slovis did a year ago, you can get screwed. And then it just unraveled from there. And yeah, they are really, really bad. This is, if you look at the history of the Pitt program, this is one of the worst Pitt seasons, individual seasons ever. No matter whether you want to talk about claims or not, we're talking about just overall wins and loss record on the schedule. This is one of the worst ever. And I don't see a path to make this anything respectable before the year finishes, to be honest.
Man, that's tough. Yeah, Jurkovec, he looked like he had a really bright future at Boston College. I don't know if it was concussions or what. It seems like ever since his freshman year, he hasn't been the same player. I don't want to try to ruin saying the quarterback that's starting now his name, but I haven't got to see much film on you guys. Does he is he a mover? Is he going to run around back there? I know Florida State's had a bit of issues, kind of like Georgia, to where we stopped the run, but mobile quarterbacks has given us fits. Is that something we'll see out of him, or what should we look at with him?
There's some mobility there. I mean, it's not like he's a runner that's going to run 100 yards by himself. This isn't like a Michael Vick QB or anything like that, but there's some mobility there. Phil Jurkovec basically was a statue and was misfiring left and right. And the weirdness about him and Pitt not working out, he came back home. Pitt initially tried to recruit him before he went to BC, before the Notre Dame situation. Like, Pitt tried to bring him home. He skirted Pitt, said, no, I'm going to better situations. Like, I'm going to go to Notre Dame. I'd rather go there than Pitt. Pitt was in their feelings about it at the time, years ago. He comes back to try to save his value. The program kind of needed somebody. In retrospect, maybe they should have stayed the course with whoever else, but it didn't work out. He made too many mistakes. There's some mobility there, and he actually has played relatively well since coming in. So I would bet, yeah, he's played relatively well. It's just too little too late now, and you're playing against, as you're talking about, a potential playoff team on this schedule. You had Notre Dame, who they had some hiccups early in the year, but there's tons of talent there. They're way better than Pitt, obviously. You had that Louisville game, but it's not been an easy schedule once you did change QBs. Like, there's no, you can take it easy for one game or so. North Carolina was in there, but he's played okay in there. I mean, I would imagine this is where Florida State needs to pick up some style points, though, because talking about the committee, I would imagine the committee's going to sit there and say Pitt is god-awful. If you win this by anything less than 7, that's going to be something that we're going to look at as a negative at this point.
7.
Anyway, I mean, obviously, it spreads like 22, I believe, right?
Yeah,
the spread's like 22. Yeah, so, and obviously what Notre Dame just did to them, it should be way more.
One of the things that one of my friends who coaches at Louisville, who you got one of the victories, but he also brought up North Carolina and Clemson's loss. Luckily for Florida State, we're not playing this on the CW. right before reruns of Malcolm in the Middle. So like CW has been where all big brands go to die against to get upset. But one of the things that's always been known in Narduzzi or a Pitt squad is very good defense, very good running. What happened? Because it doesn't even forget the quarterback situation, because it doesn't even seem like that staple of a Pitt team is there. When I think about the times when I would see Miami struggle when they would go up there and all different things, I always remember a physical ball club, and it doesn't even look like the ball club is even physical. Okay, you talk to that and maybe who was lost from a leadership perspective that kind of just made this culture that Narduzzi had built up kind of seem to kind of evaporate and so quickly.
Yeah, I mean, Pitt's sent a lot of players to the NFL in recent years, for sure. I mean, can't see many others. They've absolutely been a factory of churning players to the National Football League, and Narduzzi did kind of speak about this, that I'm sure everyone's heard about, the comment where he basically stuck his foot in his mouth, where he said, we lost all these players to the NFL, we had a great few years, and then we didn't replace them at all. And all the players in the current team are basically saying, okay, we might not be, set the world on fire this year, but you're going to need to fill the whole roster because we're all going to transfer out because now we hate you. So it was basically like a Dion comment, but you don't have the cachet of Dion. And Narduzzi had to apologize. He's actually issued multiple apologies since that game. That it's just a mess over there. But Pitt thinks, Narduzzi's a defensive guy. Pitt has always been that tough defensive team, especially against the run, especially on the defensive line. However, what I will say to anybody who maybe doesn't follow the Pitt program closely, and just myself having covered it now for years and being in Pittsburgh media, as well as covering everything else we do there, that Pitt had defensive issues even in the ACC title year that Mark was bringing up. I mean, the reason why Pitt wasn't talked about as a playoff team, even while they were running through the ACC that year, is because they had a group of 5 loss earlier in the season. I believe that final, just off the top of my head, was like 49-48. Or something like that. They lost by 1 despite Pickett threw 6 touchdowns. So the defense had their issues, even in a great year that was the best Pitt season they've had in 20 plus years. So the defense has had their growing pains and they've had their moments, even though they have a defensive coach. It's kind of been a funny thing that Pitt won that ACC title for many because of the offense and because of Mark Whipple, who then Narduzzi kind of ushered out the door, and they had a horrible relationship. And then you're seeing this now, but they churn talent. But this has been the easy thing is to point to the QB because he's made so many mistakes and turned it over tons. But yes, they've also played really poor defensively. I mean, you just look at what they're giving up here. I mean, Notre Dame's not throwing 58 points on the board because the quarterback's not playing well. And granted, that's not Jerkovic, but you go to North Carolina, you go to the other games, 41, North Carolina scored. The only real bad loss here that they didn't allow tons of points in is West Virginia, who I also do cover, and they're looking to be a bowl team, which is way better than anybody else would have thought. But that was 17-6 to score, and that was a backup QB in for WVU with Garrett Greenhurt. Cincinnati, even right before that in the Big 12, and they're a bit down right now, they did at least put up 27. So, yeah, this defense has had a rough season, to say the very, very least. And in terms of fixing it, I mean, many could think, okay, Pitt will just be right back where they've been next year because it's mostly been good the last several years, except for this blip on the radar. A lot of this may depend on Narduzzi. It may depend on who he loses from the roster. It may depend on what he can do in the portal and if he can really bring 80 guys in like Dion did, or how many guys he can bring in. He's proven he can bring in QBs, but not defensive players. And it's probably an overall conversation, too, on the state of the program in terms of even after the ACC title year. Everyone knows about Jordan Addison leaving for money at USC. Like, Narduzzi thought he could bring the Pitt program to be a playoff type of program, to be a blue blood like they were in the 70s. That's not been proven to be the case. That it's proven they had one really special year. Pickett didn't play in the bowl. They didn't win that. They do win the Sun Bowl. But even in the midst of that, the second best player on the team is leaving to go elsewhere for money. So who knows where the Pitt program can go. But it's not been just the QB, to be fair. Yeah. If the defense played as bad as they've been with a much better QB making less mistakes, they also may have lost. It just wouldn't be as glaring to you.
Anything else for Mike? Or Mike, do you have anything for these guys on Florida State?
I want to know who are the guys on offense that we should be looking for, and who are the guys on defense? Because no matter what, regardless, it is a Division I football program. So there's got to be somebody, because I do Thursday breakdowns, so I'll be watching Pitt film. I did watch one for Wake. I can't get that. I can't get those 30 minutes back. But if I were to, but I also was watching. I was watching for Wake Forest, so I'm going to be watching this time with more of a perspective on Pitt. So I want to be able to. I want to know, like, all right, if I'm watching this film, who are the guys that you would know from covering that would stand out and pop out on film that would make it that could make it interesting. Like if the game were to get, because I already know the game plan. Not saying it's anything bad. It's the way to beat Florida State if you don't have cats. It's what Boston College actually is the only team that was successful in doing it. Slow the game down, make it muck it up a little bit, force Florida State to press. But if they were able to do that, who would be the guys who would stand out?
Well, it also will be interesting if anything changes up, because somebody that Pitt fans have been bringing up a lot that pops immediately into mind that could arguably been underutilized this year is Rodney Hammond Jr. So that's something that Pitt is saying Frank Signetti has said he's aware of, that he wants to utilize more of. He wants to get more to utilizing more of the ground game, especially now with a quarterback that's only had a few games under his belt. So does that happen? Does Pitt kind of go back to using a little bit more of the ground game, using Rodney Hammond Jr. as whether it be just a runner or even as a receiver as well in the backfield? So that potentially could be a player to watch for if he gets a little bit unleashed in this game. Not exactly saying that's going to happen. I do also think there's mobility at QB. So I do think that not only there's a little bit of an arm, but there's mobility of QB. So they have a little bit more explosiveness. Who knows if Louisville in that game is ever going to happen again, but there are opportunities. Pitt potentially could move the ball. So that's one for sure. But again, I mean, I would say in terms of who Pitt, I wouldn't imagine this is going to be a close game, but I'll actually ask quickly to flip this a little bit before I go on in terms of what Pitt maybe could do defensively. Are you guys expecting this to be a Florida State beatdown? Like, are you looking at this like you watch? Because you're saying you watch tons of film. Is there something in there that you think that Pitt can do that potentially make this a close game?
I've only watched
watching the
Louisville
game.
I only watched the Pitt Wake game. I saw bits and pieces of the Louisville game. I know Louisville turned the ball over a lot, but they put up a lot of they put up a lot of not points. Excuse me. They put up a lot of yards on offense.
Right.
To me, good teams win. Great teams cover. I think Jesus said that at the Sermon on the Mount. But I think I do think if it's actually what
they
is
have
it?
Up there? Big spread.
I think we cover.
Well, last time I looked, it was like 22, right?
Yeah, if it's okay, we'll cover if it's that. I think Michigan got like 32 points. Is their spread this week? Like if it was that, I'm not betting that. I wouldn't lay that. But I haven't watched all of the film on Pitt yet. But I do think we are 3 touchdowns, at least 3 touchdowns better than Pitt at this.
And Wake Forest was playing a third string quarterback in that game.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's true as well. Yeah, I would imagine unless Pitt can churn some turnovers, this potentially could certainly be a problem here. But the funny thing is 22 and 20, I mean, 22, 21 and a half, 22 and a half, whatever it is now, that is an insane spread for a team that's been in bowl games recently, that won the conference a couple years ago, that still obviously has players that were recruited even though they lost for the NFL. So like that is an insane situation. But so maybe Pitt could cover it. Well, it's based on how Pitt's been playing. I wouldn't be surprised if they lose by 30 points. But I will also say, guys, Vegas has been off a lot this season in terms of spreads. I mean, just Vegas usually is right on the money. But even starting obviously off the season with the Colorado TCU situation, then going on now, I got tons of examples. I mean, Vegas has been off a lot on spreads, but it's a lot.
I think the only one they were off was, well, no, they were off on 2. They're off Boston College and Clemson, but
Okay.
they were off on Clemson because they gave us points. So when we won, I think we messed that up, or it was like 2, or it was -2. So that's what it was. It was -2 Clemson. So we covered that, but
Okay.
it's not so much that. It's not so much that. It's the reality is your quarterback it's a tough play. So like the games that you did win, again, it's not to take anything from you. It would have to be a complete anomaly of what Florida State has been showing to be in the last 2 years. And what I mean by that is like Jordan Travis, there's one thing Jay Trav doesn't do. He doesn't really throw interceptions. He's thrown 2 this year, and I believe last year he threw 5 with a high touchdown ratio. We don't really fumble the ball. And it's just in our defense, if you can't throw the ball, which they actually do really well, your best shot is running the ball on our defense. And I don't know if that's
well, that's why I brought up Rodney Hammond and potentially going back to the running game, because that's kind of what set up, obviously, the year the Pickett had and kind of what has kind of been a bread and butter the last few years. Signetti kind of got away from it this year, to say the very, very least. I will say, for a defensive player, to name one here, and this is a transfer they got from Florida that was a potential player they also wanted to recruit years ago, and a local kid, and that's Donovan McMillan, in terms of a safety defensive back. I mean, even in the brawl, I believe he had 19, don't quote me, but I believe maybe 19 tackles in that game or something really gaudy. And that was a game, obviously, they lost, but I was there covering that. He really stood out as a player that just was all over the football, kind of playing with his hair on fire. And he's played well in most of the games this year. So the path, obviously, to trying to cover this spread or somehow create another upset win, like, oddly enough, I kind of felt a vibe that maybe they could somehow beat Louisville, just because while Louisville was playing really, really well, this is kind of what Pitt does. Like, when they're at their worst, they just throw out a quality win and have it mean nothing almost. And that's what happened. But they did it off of creating turnovers. Can they create turnovers? Can they score enough in a consistent basis off of what Florida State's doing? And if they do go to more of the ground game, that potentially give them an edge in terms of controlling the clock. Again, why I think maybe they should do that. But on McMillan, I would imagine if they're creating turnovers and they're scoring off those turnovers and they're covering a spread, or they're somehow beating Florida State to ruin their year, he's getting a bunch of tackles and probably creating them, I would imagine. Otherwise,
Louisville, that game also didn't surprise me, the Louisville game, because they were coming off that big high against Notre Dame.
Right. It felt like a trap, like emotionally. I don't even have great analysis to say, but I wasn't shocked by it just because of what you're saying there. They almost had to come back down to earth, and Pitt just does that. But other than that, it's not been good.
Yeah, as much as the transfer portal and the, one-time transfer, NIL and everything has kind of helped a team like Florida State kind of level the playing field and kind of close the gap between those top 10 teams, kind of the top 15, 20 teams. It seems like in the, 40th to 60th kind of teams, it's really hard for them. It seems like you guys he got there and he was wanting to build it up on getting defensive linemen and really growing them in-house and keeping guys for 4, 5, 6 years. Seems like this NIL and portal thing has just kind of thrown that out of the window for Narduzzi. So I definitely feel your pain. I couldn't imagine losing like Heisman contenders year after year to the portal like that. So just not trying to beat up on you too bad. I see how it is, man.
Yeah, no, I hear you. And I mean, I don't have the emotional attachment that some of maybe people who aren't covering the program does. Like, covering it every day, as Mark knows, like you lose any fan card attachment. You eventually just get jaded to it all, honestly, no matter what the program's doing. But yeah, Narduzzi was trying to build it up and do kind of a developmental thing. You can't do that anymore. He even spoke out kind of against what Dion did, and obviously that hasn't fully worked for Dion, but still way better than last year. You can't kind of have that mentality anymore, although they're clearly willing to bring in transfer QBs. They did it with Slovis to replace Kenny Pickett. Slovis has been better this year at BYU than he was at Pitt. They did it again with Phil Jurkovec. Some thought they should stay the course. That clearly didn't work. So we've seen tons of examples across college football. You bring in a transfer QB, it could really work. You could boom. If it doesn't work, you're going to have a worse year than you would have thought. So that's just how it is today. They have shown they've been able to bring in some transfers. It's not like they haven't been able to do that. And it took a while. Like, people also forget, there were a lot of Pitt fans that wanted Narduzzi fired in the early going of the ACC title year. After what I talked about, the Group of 5 loss, they wanted him fired then. Obviously, they win the conference, so the program, the fans are kind of cool with him again. But these comments, how bad this year is, basically putting all the blame on a coordinator instead of himself, saying he made the decision to bench a guy, which is just asinine. Like, you're the coach, it's on you. That's kind of lost a lot of luster with fans. He's not going to get fired after only 2 years removed from winning a major conference. But who knows if maybe he's never wanted to go to anywhere else before, even though Michigan State's flirted with him in the past. Who knows if they call and he says, I'm just done with Pittsburgh media and fans because it's just an argument every week, like it's been, or if he ends up eventually being removed. Like, it just hasn't been good. And to kind of pump the tires more on Donovan McMillan, by the way, as an impact player for the game, I just looked it up. He has 65 tackles so far on the year, had 8 against Notre Dame. And again, that's a guy on a really bad team, a defense that's allowed a lot of points, a team that's turned it over tons, and the vibes are bad. And his stats are really, really good, and he's tackling a lot. So if he has anything shy of 15 tackles, they're probably well out of the game. But if he gets up there, then who knows, and maybe creates turnovers. But, yeah, I mean, they could turn it back around. There's still, reason to go to Pitt, but I don't think anybody I didn't think Pitt would be as good as some thought this year, but I did not think it would be this bad. I'll say that.
What is the locker room like after the comments? Because I like how you did the caveat by tying it in with Deion a little bit, because to me, Deion said the exact same thing, except for his was very specific to guys that he brought in Louis Luggage.
Sure.
I saw the full Narduzzi quote. I do believe he was misquoted a little bit, but the damage was already done. And I don't really know him like that, covering him. I've just seen him kind of from afar and like, okay, he's winning at Pitt and he has this. But what is the comments done? What's the climate like up there? Because if anything, that's a tough. As a former player, I don't know what I would say if a coach said something like that.
Well, I mean, we can just search on Twitter. I don't have them in front of me to know what the players kind of felt and what they were saying, because they were replying. Now there has been, and Noah Hiles with the Post-Gazette. He's a colleague of mine. I've worked with him before. I do think he's a good reporter. I don't think he was trying to stir anything up. Like, that's not what he does. I think what he stepped in there that you're alluding to, and I've done it before too, is you're sitting there at a press conference. You're trying to rapid finger, type out what a guy says literally. And he made the mistake of putting quotes while he was paraphrasing. So a lot of the time, like if I don't get the quote exact, then you can't put the quotes there. You just got to say that, I'm paraphrasing this, because it's hard to get an entire paragraph while the guy's talking in the midst of all the emotions, everything going on. He accidentally, or maybe he made the mistake of putting the quotes around it. So that's kind of how it run amok. But at the end of the day, Narduzzi isn't denying that he was saying the players weren't good enough in a way, or at least that. I'll tell you this, regardless of what he intended, because I know that he claims he didn't intend it to come off the way it did. Noah has apologized as well, saying that he shouldn't have put the quotes there if he's paraphrasing. And I know that, like, James Franklin obviously kind of needled him. I don't know if you saw him, where he said, I guys, I don't want to have a war with you, but like I do try to be careful in how I answer questions, because I don't want to answer them wrong or go a certain way like I've seen other coaches do. And Penn State fans, even Pitt fans, all think that was about Narduzzi. Could have been talking Deion too. It was similar to what Deion said, but Deion did go right at the O-line. That's been a problem this year, not the overall team Pitt is, although it has been a team issue. But players responded. They were very, very upset. I will tell you that a 2023 four-star recruit that ended up going to West Virginia that Pitt tried to recruit initially, and I'm not going to say the name, but it's probably pretty clear if you follow both programs, a member of his family quote tweeted and was very upset and basically said, this is why you don't get all the players to quote unquote stay home. And I know from people in his family that the meetings with Narduzzi did not go well, which is why he eliminated Pitt relatively early on in that process. They felt like Narduzzi was a jerk and basically refused to sell Pitt and just said, we won the ACC. Why wouldn't you want to come here and stay home? Like, how could you possibly talk to WVU? And that attitude, I think the issue with Narduzzi, that we'll see how it goes. There are players upset. He did apologize 2 or 3 times. I don't know in their heart of hearts if they've accepted those apologies. I don't think they're going to quit on a year, but I know there are former players, including players in the NFL now who are on the ACC title team, have been on good Pitt teams that did not like playing for Narduzzi, even though they were winning. I know players currently on this team that do not like playing for Narduzzi. I know there are media members that don't like covering Narduzzi because they think he's a jerk. There's a lot of fans that are kind of out on him again, like they were a couple years ago because of the losing season and then because of his personality. So I do not think he does himself any favors by just having no filter at all. Like, as a journalist, I like when a guy has no filter because I want honesty. Like all fans, we say we want honesty, and the guy, he's honest, so you got to respect that. But as a head coach, you got to kind of politic this a little bit. Like, as you know, you can't just say everyone's trash in here, which is kind of what it felt like he was saying. So
yeah, and also early in the year, the part that you brought up about Dion, it's kind of like, didn't he earlier in the year say like, oh, you can't be talking about your players and just bringing everybody out and bringing in portal players? That's not how it's meant to be. Wasn't it Narduzzi that was making those comments?
So
then to come out and trash your team and say, oh, well, we need to kick everybody out and bring in new players, it's kind of like, okay, you can't. I mean, that's just not going to go over good with anybody.
No, and when he said what you're saying, Pitt was coming off of like 20 combined wins in 2 years, the ACC title, major New Year's Six game. They won the Sun Bowl. He thought, okay, I'm bringing Pitt back. Like I got arrogance here. He was appearing on all these different shows. He was doing a media car wash. You don't see him on anything now because when his team's winning, he gets real brazen and arrogant. And when he's losing, he still kind of gets brazen and arrogant, but it doesn't work. Like, you can't be that way. Now, I could argue, and he may argue, any defender of this may say that Dion is saying the same things he did week one. He's saying them now. They just lost a bunch of games in a row. They're 500. They're not a national contender like he thought they were earlier. Why is nobody criticizing him now versus before? Because it's the same comments and the team's losing. They still clearly are not quitting on him. But why does Dion, with only an FCS coaching resume, despite being one of the greatest athletes of all time, get away with it? But Narduzzi does not.
I think his message has been consistent. I think that's the difference. I think Dion has been consistent with his message. And that's kind of the thing I saw. It seems like Narduzzi was like hating on Dion's way of doing it. And then now he's come around to it. And now that's the message he's putting out there. And it's like, whoa, you can't do this now. That's just my view on it.
Dion set the tone that this is how it's going to be here. So I think that is fair.
Gotta play.
That's probably why. But I there are a lot of people that like Mark Whipple left because he didn't like Narduzzi. Like, that's pretty much something I'm comfortable saying. So, Narduzzi's hard. He's a hard-nosed guy. Like, you can appreciate honesty, but covering him, I mean, it's not warm and fuzzy. It's not like the family atmosphere.
It's a new era. That stuff doesn't fly like it used to. I mean, you see it even with like Jimbo Fisher and guys like that. It's like
Dabo Sweeney,
the media's had it.
Yeah, Dabo Sweeney went at a guy on a call-in show, and a fan called in. Now, I think I said on Twitter, I thought it was a bit over the top of a comment because the kid's upset. I mean, he just built them into a dynasty, the best years in program history, and the kid's saying he should be fired. But
giving him a 2-minute run in, that was crazy. They just let him pretty much shit on him for 2 minutes.
And that's weird. Like, I've hosted radio shows. No caller stays on for 2 straight minutes, no matter what's going on. It felt like he got set up a little bit, is what it kind of felt like. But when you're losing and you basically refuse to adapt to the era and you say, I'm not going to change, I won't, I didn't literally say this, but he won't adapt. He won't go to the portal. He wants to develop. It wants his way or the highway. He's not willing to give anything to the kids who are getting paid. Then, I mean, you're going to have problems. And these coaches are somewhat resistant a little bit.
Mike, we appreciate you being here. Mike Oste with Pittsburgh Sports Now. Pitt and Florida State getting together on a Saturday at Pittsburgh. I see that the weather is going to be decent. That was another thing I was thinking off season, in addition to Pitt being tough, that it could be, Mike knows this, and I know this from living in the North, that summer shuts off like that. It was 75 a few days ago. Now it's gone and it's not coming back, but it's 60 degrees on Saturday. Shouldn't be any kind of big factor there. Mike, appreciate you being here.
Absolutely, guys. Definitely appreciate the time. Nice, meeting you guys all in a way, talking to you again, Mark. So absolutely.
Thanks, Mike. All right. Wanted to make sure we still had 5 or 6 minutes here at the end because to get more Florida State reps in here. Anything coming out of that Wake Forest game that strikes you guys as being important heading into Pitt?
Start fast, and just finish. The only thing I didn't like when I did, and I just talked about it during my overview, is I don't like not having. If we're going to score, we need to score in the first 3 quarters. If there's a quarter we don't score, I don't want to score in the fourth. If we're blowing people out, we had a 10 points. A 10-point first quarter is fine. 24-point second quarter, that's really good. But to score none, and Wake Forest gets 9 in that quarter, really 10. They got a touchdown and a field goal, but they went for 2 and missed it. It made it feel like they had hope, but I just really want Mike to become heartless and take away hope. But I think it's not from a lack of trying. Still not having Johnny Wilson, and really, I think fans have to realize why we go to Keon Coleman a lot. Why we go to 6, because there were plays to be made consistently by number 21. Number 88 ended up doing some things better, but there 0. I'm not trying to call the guys out, but just saying there were plays to be made, and those plays did not get made, and that derails and slows down drops. So I would like to just see them. They don't have to score on every drive, but if we can have a consistent theme of points and offense coming, I think that was great. But at least we got out of there without any, relatively healthy, and we were able to sit some guys who probably would have made plays for us and go out there without a full squad.
Yeah, and that might be the longest conversation I've ever sit through just to hear that the team is garbage. Just, I mean,
yeah,
everything that was said, and I'm like, you could have just said that the team's garbage, and I think we got it. Like, it was. I feel bad for people who have to cover that, because you're giving details about emotions, and you're talking about what a coach said 5 times. I'm like, man, I want this to be, talk your team up for us, because I already don't think they're good. But if they're this bad, all I want is like James said, I want to score in the first 3 quarters, but I want to get out of this game without injury. I'm a little bit worried about the field. I am, because we've gotten hurt at Pitt a lot. So I want to get out of this game without injury to key players, because that's is the Pitt game worth playing? Are they going to give us a game? Probably not. There's probably not going to be any life source in Pitt. So the only thing we have to lose is health and browning points, really, because if we don't blow them out, then the question comes into how not, because Pitt's terrible. And then but you blow them out, but someone pops an ankle or something, you don't necessarily need your best of the best in this game, but you need to get browning points right now, because you need to put your foot on opponents' necks. So I don't know. I'm this game. I hate this game. I wanted Pitt to be a much better team, because I don't mind. I don't want anybody to get hurt ever, but I don't mind when there's a battle going. Hey, you get injured, but we were battling a team to win, instead of this is one of those games I don't know, just this Alabama team we're about to play. I'm so glad that's at home, because I trust our field, but Pitt's field is just garbage. The team's garbage. The coach is garbage. I don't know. It's just all garbage, and I don't want to play the game.
The field is definitely garbage. I had to watch it last week. The Jags played there this past Sunday, and it was it wasn't the prettiest field.
Didn't they have guys getting hurt in warm-ups? I've heard people out there all year literally getting hurt in warm-ups and everything else. It's crazy, because the NFL field, is it not getting maintained and ready for the Pitt games, and then they redo it for the NFL game? That's the only thing I could think.
No, you just can't play. You can't host 8 to 9 NFL games and then 7
just too much
college games and God knows what else. The fields were not meant to be battered like that in a region like that, where it's not like Florida, where you'll have green all the time, so you can grow grass pretty heavily. And there's only one real way to do it is to grow your grass thicker, so that it has that. So there's patches, but that just makes it weirder for Florida guys who come off of like our fields are like button green. So like it's just like we keep that thing manicured as low as possible for optimal speed. But you know, if those are the things that we're worried about, then we worried about the wrong things. So we just gotta go out there and take care of business trip. I can't wait to go up there. I haven't been to Pittsburgh in years. So I'm looking to eat good. Mark, do I need to wear an overcoat in this kind of temperature? Like, 'cause I have to wear a suit because I'm going for the Gator Bowl. But like, I just need to know, like, do I need a jacket over my jacket, or what's the deal?
I am telling you that I've lived in it my whole life, and the older I get, the more I'm sitting inside wearing a jacket. So I would say it's going to be a high of 60, but the sun's not going to be out. It's going to be out on Sunday, but on Saturday, I'm looking at cloudy and 60. What time's the game kick off?
3:30, so it's going to be cold at
3:30,
night.
so it's going to be right at the time. But the back half of that game's probably going to be in the low 50s, something.
And
in
it's
that
on
range.
the river.
Yeah, it's on the river.
Overcoat.
Yeah. I would also say it's a good thing and be a little thankful that the game's not in 3 weeks, because that field's really going to be more on the downside after there's more precipitation and nights in the 30s and back up into the back and forth, and you get thawing and freezing back and forth, and that really screws up ground and grass. Yeah. But yeah, I'm right there with you, Chris. That's exactly what I was thinking this entire time. There is no upside to this except get it over with and get out of town.
Like eliminate
like
all
a punishment.
penalties on both sides. No penalties, so the game can hurry, get it over with. Because like,
Give us a
my
running
main
clock.
concern is that we're going to try to run the ball in this game.